Hello everyone, my name is Alicia Williams and today I will be interviewing Mary Cassatt. Hello everyone, thank you for inviting me, Alicia. Thank you for coming, Mary. Now, this is an interview. I'll ask you some questions. If for any reason you are uncomfortable, just tell me, I'll change the subject. Okay, if I get uncomfortable, I promise I'll tell you. Okay, so my first question is, how would you describe yourself? If I had to describe myself, I'd say I'm an American Impressionist painter, printmaker, feminist, and spinster. That is an interesting way to describe yourself. I love it, Mary. Now, let's move on to my second question. What was your childhood like? Where were you born? What were your parents' names? Were you upper, middle, lower class? And do you have any siblings? Oh no, I don't mind introducing myself at all, Alicia. Let me just put these on because I am blind as a bat. Hello everyone again. My name is Mary Cassatt. I was born May 22nd, 1844 in a city that is now part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents are Robert Cassatt and Catherine Johnson Cassatt. I am the second daughter of 4 who survived infancy, so I did have more siblings, but unfortunately they did not survive infancy. I'd say we lived a pretty comfortable life, upper middle class. My father was a successful stockbroker and real estate broker, and my mother came from a wealthy or well-to-do banking family. We stayed in Pennsylvania until 1851 when we left for Europe for an extended stay. And to be honest, I spent a good chunk of my life in Europe and Paris. Interesting. It sounds like you had a pretty good childhood. Let me move on to my second question. You seem like a very bright and educated woman. Was education important to your parents? Were they formally educated? Did you get formally educated, or was that something only really reserved to your brothers? Oh yes, education was very important in my family. My father was formally educated and so was my mother, and they felt that all of their children should be as well. It was still pretty uncommon during my time for women to receive a formal education, but it was even more uncommon during my mother's time, and it was something really only reserved for upper class women. Education was so important that we moved from Paris to Europe so that my oldest brother, Alexander, could study engineering. And of course, I myself got a formal education at the Pennsylvania Academy for Fine Arts. That's pretty remarkable that your parents focused so much on education and providing a proper one. How did you like art school? I actually found the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts very dull and uninspiring. Thankfully, I was able to convince my parents to allow me to move back to Paris because I just felt that would be the best for my education and my art career. I want to preference that at this time, the art world was very male dominated. It was almost unheard of for a woman to be a professional artist and have a career in painting. And to be honest, it was just very uncommon in general for women to have careers during my time. So it did take some convincing from my parents, but thankfully, once I was in Paris, I was able to study under famous painters like Thomas Couture and Charles Chaplin. I completely understand, Mary. I was also very bored and uninspired by school as well, but it seems like you did pretty good for yourself. You are a famous painter after all. Let's move on. Did you ever return to America, or did you spend the rest of your life in Europe? I actually did return to America in 1871, not by choice. I was escaping the France-Prussian War. And unfortunately, during that time in America, I realized that the art world was just as dull and uninspiring in America as my formal art education from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So by 1872, I was back in Europe. I studied famous painters and paintings in Italy and Spain, and I eventually did return back to Paris. I always returned back to Paris. I was just drawn to it. Makes sense. Let me rewind to my first question. When I asked you to describe yourself, one of the words you used was feminist. Why do you label yourself a feminist? Well, to put it simply, Alicia, I am a feminist. I worked hard to carve a path so that other women could be artists. Like I stated earlier, during my time, it was very uncommon for women to have careers, let alone be famous painters. The art world was very male dominated. So I did my best to carve a path for future female artists and painters. I am also, a very vocal part of the women's suffragette movement, and it is reflected in some of my works, specifically my painting, Woman with a Sunflower. Now, the sunflower was a suffragette symbol, and more specifically, this painting was exhibited in a New York art exhibit that was raising money and spreading awareness of the women's suffrage movement. So yes, that is why I consider myself a feminist. That was very interesting, Mary. As someone who also is a fan of sunflowers and the suffragette movement, I find the work you've done in paving the way for other women artists very inspirational. Let's move on. When did you really debut as an artist? I actually found success pretty early in my career. Several of my paintings were exhibited in the Paris Salon, which was is a very lucrative art exhibit, including my work Offering the Penal to the Bullfighter. I wouldn't say I truly debuted until 1879. I was in my 30s after I discovered Edgar Degas and his Impressionist art style, and I joined his group, the Impressionists. Interesting, Mary. It sounds like you had a lot of fun as an Impressionist. What were some common themes in your works? My family was often present or used as models in my paintings, more specifically my mother and my sister Lydia. My sister Lydia was one of my favorite subjects, and she is the subject for my paintings The Garden and Autumn. Unfortunately, she died in 1888, and her death affected me for many years. But backtracking a bit, by the time I had joined Degas and his Impressionism group, my family had moved to Paris to be closer to me and keep an eye on me. Other common themes or subjects for my works are women in Paris and mother and child. I loved catching and capturing the sweet, intimate moments between a mother and her child, and just women of Paris. I just find that so sweet, Mary. The fact that you used your family as muses in your work. You guys seem very close, especially with your sister. Kind of piggybacking off of my last question, you seem to paint a lot of women and children. Did you ever have any? Did you ever settle down maybe with Degas? No. I knew from the beginning of my career I could either have a career or have a family, and I chose my career. Some people think that my paintings and me painting mother and child so often was me longing for a family, but I knew my choice and I made it. Funnily enough, Degas also never married, and people did theorize that we were together or lovers, but we were just very close friends. Interesting. I wanted to preface that I wasn't implying that you had to settle down and get married. It was just simply an observation. Um, Moving on to my next question. Sorry. How long were you an Impressionist? Was that for the rest of your life? Did they disband at any point? If they did you keep in touch with them? What happened to the Impressionists? So Degas' Impressionist group disbanded in 1886. But me and Degas stayed close and continued to collaborate, and I continued using the Impressionism art style for the rest of my career. That was my art style. That makes sense. I feel like sometimes when groups get really big, um, they just disband and start doing their own little thing. That happens a lot in like bands, I've noticed. So, yes, people get famous, they grow apart, they disband, and they just go do their own little thing. Moving on to my last and final question of the night. When did you stop painting, printmaking, and just producing art? Did you create until you died, or at some point did you get too old and you had to retire? So I stopped printmaking in 1901. My health was on the decline and I was suffering from diabetes and cataracts. I didn't stop painting until 3 years later when I was basically blind and I could not paint anymore. I later died in 1926 at my country home right outside of Paris, France. Like I said earlier, I always return to France or Paris. And you know, that makes sense. That's just the reality of getting older. Your hands don't move as well as they used to, your eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, and sometimes you just have to quit doing what you love. I appreciate you, Mary, for coming and allowing me to interview you. Is there any facts you want to blurt out or anything you want to say to the audience? Thank you once again for having me, Alicia. I've enjoyed talking about myself. It's been a lovely experience. I don't really have anything else to say, but maybe if someone in the crowd or audience has a question, I'd be happy to answer.